All right, Pat, big one tonight. Season 2, Episode 3, entitled What is Dead May Never Die. I think the title kind of follows a lot of what happens in this episode. This is a banger episode, to say the least. Let's hear your opening pundit for the night.
Yeah, well, what was the episode called? What is Dead May Never Die? Well,
Yes.
You know, what we learned on Talkin TV last week was what's recorded will never lie.
Clearly. You're still not letting me go for that one, huh? That's going to be our first
Yeah,
bit.
Yeah, but you made good, I hope. You know?
I did indeed, yes. So, with that being said, let's get this started. All right, Pat, so I don't know how you're feeling tonight, but I'm feeling pretty good because after last week's episode, which was kind of a little bit slow, we've got a cooker tonight. Like, I know you mentioned that Season 2 was really got the ball rolling and got into the action in a way that it kind of took Season 1 a little bit of time with, but I feel like this episode right here is like the exemplary episode as far as like showing, okay, this was like kind of, even though we hadn't gotten to a battle point yet, this was an exemplary way to kind of show off Game of Thrones, like, overall bravado, just the level of like kind of mystery and intrigue and kind of the true nature of politics really getting into it was established here.
Yeah, Dom, so for the most part, we already talked about like the opening scene of this episode, which is sort of a continuation of what happened at the end,
right,
with Craster sort of hitting Jon.
Yes.
And Craster just burst in and he's like, Mormont, and everybody
like,
get the hell out.
Everyone get out. All of this. So this is like kind of Jon's Daenerys moment of this episode, where Daenerys is not in this episode at all, and the only purpose that Jon serves is just to get the action kicked off and like get them on the next stage of their journey, and also to like fulfill a small piece of info as like once he learns from the Lord Commander that he knew the entire time. But like, I had a quick question about that though. So like, Mormont wasn't quite sure about the existence of the White Walkers, but he says that he knew that Craster was giving the sons away. Like, what did he think was going on there? Like, how did he never put 2 and 2 together? Like,
well, I would say that, you know, zombies is probably something he's never seen before. So, you know, that was probably genuine scared, you know, like our reaction. You know, he didn't know what to think of it. Maybe he heard the stories, maybe whatever. But for the most part, I would imagine that the White Walkers themselves, you know, sort of the zombie kings, are a little bit different than the actual sort of, you know, petty zombies that are roaming
like
around.
The Whites.
Yeah,
although
exactly.
They do get pretty badass later on. That's the one thing I will say about the Whites. They do turn into like pretty fearless warriors, other than the much less of the shambling masses that we saw in these first couple seasons.
Yeah,
Game
so
of Thrones,
I would imagine. I would imagine that Mormont probably knew, you know, up to a point, but he didn't know everything. You know, so it's one of those things where, yeah, okay, he knew he was giving Craster a break because it was, you know, that sort of thin line between life and death beyond the wall, but ultimately, with Jon's like moral superiority complex that he has going on throughout this show, basically this is a problem. You know, we can't give up the babies to the kids. So the only thing that happens that we haven't talked about in this particular scene is the fact that the Night's Watch is going to leave Craster's Keep, and Sam gives Gilly the thimble that is the only memento that he has from his mother.
Yes, indeed. It's a sweet scene. And like the thing that I like about this episode just in general before we get into the rest of the plot lines, because there's a lot to talk about here. There was a lot that happens in this episode. So this is the second episode of the entire series written by Brian Cogman, who, as I said, wrote Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things the last season, and wrote like pretty much like one of the most, if not the most influential episode of like each season going forward, with the exception of season 5. And this is the second one that he wrote, and it's fantastic to say the least. It's directed by Alex Sakharov, who was a cinematographer who got his start on The Sopranos. He's pretty much been a part of every single HBO show, moved from cinematographer to director. Did a really good job directing this, because this episode, as like opposed to like Alan Taylor's pretty like stark placement of the camera and like a lot of like kind of flat overall like landscape shots, Alec goes like right in up there with the camera and like uses a lot of interesting camera angles, and I don't know, there's like a really interesting sense of dynamics that come from this episode that I feel like we're kind of not there for the first two, and I feel like that shows in every scene, even the slower, more quiet scenes, like the scene with Bran where we're really inside of his head for this next scene, and we're kind of following him through the dream.
The starting of the dreams.
Yes, the dreams. I feel like I'm back in Shark Boy Lava Girl listening to Shark Boy rap about dreams.
Yeah, so Brian is basically just like, "Hey, Maester Lewin, like I'm like in this dream. It's like I'm eating the flesh. Blood all over the place.
It's like I
And,
am the wolf.
yeah,
Be
and
the wolf brand.
yeah, and I've always heard stories. Everyone's told me stories that there's literally people that exist in this world that can take over animals." And he's like, "Nah, I'm a Maester. I would have heard about that." It's like,
No, but it gets even better because then he literally like pulls a thing off of his chain and is like, "This is Valyrian steel. This shows that I too used to believe in such things, and I tried my hand at magic." I can just like imagine like a younger Maester Lewin try like some really grandiose, over the top spell that just nothing happens. Like I can
There you
totally
go.
see that happening.
I think that's the new CW spinoff show, right? Just have Maester Lewin as a young
As a
student.
teenager.
Yeah, exactly. But for the most part, I would say that there's so many characters, the wargs or whatever they call them, coming up later in these
Shape
series.
changers, as they're called.
Yeah, but we see them. We see them sort of in abundance. Specifically, I think it's in season 3. We're gonna see a storyline with Jon Snow beyond the wall. That's probably the biggest place that we're gonna see it. So I think it's one of those things where they're setting the seed and they're planting it and they're getting ready to show us this. But it's almost like Maester Lewin has had to see this, or at least read about it, heard about it. These ravens are going all over the place. There's no way that a learned man like this doesn't know.
There's no way. There's no way that like there's still like not enough people who don't know about the existence of Daenerys the Dragon. I mean, here's the thing. She gets away with it because of the fact, like, even though Daenerys is not in this episode, she gets away with it because of the fact that like she's stuck in the desert for like God only knows how much time takes place over the course of this season. Because like they're really weird on time with these seasons. It makes it really confusing. But yeah, like everyone pretty much knows by the time. But I guess Maester Lewin is dead by that point. But you know what? Like I said, time is confusing in this world. So who knows? Let's go. I do think that it's like he says that like magic has left this world, and it's like I did find that as like an interesting parallel where it's like, okay, so like the older generations, they hadn't really had magic for like a couple hundred years, like there hadn't been dragons alive for like the last 300 years, and now like you have this kind of new generation that kind of takes over in the season throughout this series, and this is kind of like the reemergence of magic both simultaneously with the dragons and the White Walkers, which again feels like in better hands would have actually been handled really cool as far as going for the finale of this series. But
yeah, really the only thing that happens in this scene is basically the camera work with the wolf following Odor.
Yeah, that
which
is
was
really
okay.
dope. Like you as a cameraman have to admit that was pretty good.
No, I enjoyed that a lot. It's one of those things where, hey, they might have had like a really good rig. It might have been like a quick shot to get, they might have done tons of takes, but it's interesting enough. It kind of flows us from the Jon Snow stuff into the, Bran stuff pretty easily. And the greatest part about this scene is Maester Lewin saying dragons are gone and the children of the forest are forgotten. And it's like, who the hell are these children of the forest?
Right?
Like they just kind of lay it in there, this, basically the lore, it as just general sayings. It's like basically the Maester sort of, calming someone after a nightmare, and they're peppering in that lore, very slyly in this episode.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect as far as this being kind of the episode that continues to pepper in the lore, right? I still think, like, I don't know, Pat, how do you think this show does overall as far as its kind of translation from quote unquote, period piece realism into more of like a Lord of the Rings-esque high fantasy kind of that the last 2 seasons become?
Well, I don't know if anyone really enjoyed the last 2 seasons, so
I think our good friend Eric begs to differ there.
Well, it could be. It's one of those things where like I sat down, I still enjoyed watching this show. There seemed to be something lost in the fact that there wasn't as much of the Game of Thrones sort of backstabbing type of stuff. Like it's obviously getting narrowed down to the final few players, and I think there's things that they could have done, later in the series earlier to basically keep the magic alive. Like, why did the Mountain and the Hound have to fight each other in like the final episode?
Right.
That should have been like probably season 7. It should have been one of the big moments leading us into the final season.
Yes.
But choice is choice. So we'll get there. We'll talk about it. We'll have our gripes and our big like, oh man, this was an awesome thing. But I think to answer your question about how it transfers sort of, just, history and period piece into the fantasy. I don't think there's enough. Like, I think, there's moments in the series, like when they go to Dorne and there's sort of like this little mystical nature of the characters and stuff going on behind those scenes, with like the poisons and stuff like that. It's at the end of the day, it's still just like, there's no like real fantasy. There's no hardcore fantasy. It's just peppered in,
Right.
So, it's not, I don't know if they really needed to go full blown fantasy.
Oh, you don't think
just,
they did?
No,
Because the thing is, I feel like I feel like the whole thing is that Martin had some aspect of that planned originally, for the books, because by that point the dragons were still fully grown. He had like some peppering in with some sorcerer stuff going on with Euron. The night, the what's it called, the Army of the Dead was still on their full march. So like, I definitely have a feeling that like some of it was meant to be peppered into the original source material.
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is, this TV show could have gone full fantasy if it, peppered in some more of the other type of elements. Like, I remember basically watching the show and getting to season 4 and then reading like a Wikipedia page. Like, I was looking something up about, Catelyn Stark, and basically it told us about the fact that she gets revived and she becomes a character
Yes.
in the books.
The Lady Stoneheart character. Yes.
Yeah,
that
Lady
Targaryen
Stoneheart.
sacrifices himself to revive her.
So I remember when I read that and learned about it, I was basically like, oh my God, this is going to break open. This is really going to get crazy in terms of, a lot of the fantasy elements that are going to be there. It's going to be, just so much stuff going on. It's like people that we thought were dead are alive and all that type of stuff. And I think they really kind of, were very conservative about what they showed. They kind of focused it. It's about the dragons, the White Walkers, the Lord of Light to a certain degree, but the Lord of Light is one of those mystical figures that, doesn't really do much. It's like you keep, Stannis and Melisandre keep sacrificing to the Lord of Light, and, it's like only bad things really come at the end of the day for Stannis.
The Lord of Light doesn't really bring about a whole lot of stuff. I feel like that there's only like the one redemption moment in season 6, obviously, when Melisandre revives Jon. We'll get to that once we get to that. But so those were kind of like our 2 introductory scenes for like the episode. But then we get into the main action, the main meat and potatoes of the episode before, in my opinion, one of the best ending sequences yet, which of course is Catelyn Stark with Renly Baratheon in the Stormlands, which I have a bone to pick with Wikipedia or whichever posted that, because that is definitely not the reach. Theon on the Iron Islands, and Tyrion, obviously, in King's Landing, pulling off one of his most badass political ploys yet. So let's start with Catelyn, because that's where it starts. So we're in the Stormlands. Catelyn arrives, obviously, to see Renly Baratheon, King Renly Baratheon, in this case, hosting a tourney.
What is it that she says at some point? Like, basically, my son is fighting a war,
not playing one.
Yeah, exactly. So the scene here is
like the rumor mill that's already started to circulate that like maybe Renly is all talk,
Yeah, Renly and Loras and now Margaery is there because she married Renly, and now they're king and queen going to take the throne back.
Margaery Tyrell. This is the major sequence for introducing 2 major characters that would go on to play a major part. Margaery Tyrell, and as we later come to see, the knight who is victorious over Loras Tyrell in their little tourney joust. Our introduction to Brienne of Tarth, portrayed by Gwendolyn Christie, a character who would become a gigantic, no pun intended, fan favorite character.
Yeah, Dom, I think you particularly use those words on purpose, right? But for the most part, Brienne is one of the I would say my favorite characters, probably a fan favorite out there. Just someone that really embodies like being different in this world and able to carry themselves and really do good from their perspective and also the audience's perspective. And this is sort of the start of the journey, her slapping Loras around a little bit and basically earning the right to ask Renly for anything. And of course, what does she want? She wants like
in his Kingsguard, which I resent because it's specifically called in the books the Rainbow Guard in order to differentiate it from the Kingsguard. I swear to God, that's not me making that up. I believe that's actually the name in the books.
Oh, I think that would have been.
If that was a jab, like,
Yeah, here's the thing is like the whole way that the show plays it up is like it's an open secret, like people know Renly and
Right.
Loras are together, but there's not really that smoking
It's
gun,
a lot
so
more.
to speak.
It's a lot more kept in the shadow in the books.
Yeah, so I think the style of the show, with it being really deadly and everyone's life, our life is at risk all the time. Calling it the Rainbow Guard, obviously we can
It's
argue.
meant to be hopeful. It's meant to inspire.
Yeah, but we can argue that it's obviously we're taking today's understanding of the rainbow symbol and applying it into this fantasy world. But it's one of those things where you could easily have the audience thinking they're flaunting it.
Right.
And Renly and Loras are just slapping everyone in the face with their relationship, and that's probably something that's not good in a world that with Tywin Lannister, who hates every single deviant and seems to have
I really just
the
hates
most
every
power in
single
the realm.
person in general. And I wanted to point out something really interesting I find, which is that Renly is constantly being mocked behind his back, right, for not being like kingly material, but he has like more men than Stannis, as we later come to see. So the whole thing that obviously they're trying to get along with is the fact that they're kind of reconnoitering themselves to the fact that they're not really experienced. And Catelyn Stark literally brings up the comment, it's like, these are boys of summer, they'll be dead before winter, basically meaning that these are a lot of young, hungry men that have not had the chance to prove themselves in fight yet, but they are relatively inexperienced when it comes to the comings and goings of war. And as we later see, they later all end up in Stannis' employ.
Yeah, it was a really good scene. Like when they walk away from the tournament and they're sort of having a private conversation, and Brienne's watching over them. The fact is, it starts the whole scene. It's magnificent. So like Renly is walking, and Catelyn's there, and basically just like a peasant and his like horse come up, and like they're talking shop of like, oh, how'd you get injured? Oh, the horse didn't know its own strength. And Renly has such a rapport with his army, his people, with everybody, that he is like almost the ideal king, but not for this world. He's not going to make it. And that goes to my thesis.
He's almost
is that,
too ideal, if you will.
Yeah, anybody that should be, this great king or queen, whatever, or someone that's not willing to play the Game of Thrones, they are sort of enemy number one, and they're ready to be taken out.
I feel like that's particularly strong for like most of the characters in this season, because we see it happen at the end of this episode with Yarn. We see it happen like in 2 episodes with Renly. It's like this season is like a particular reinforcement. Like season 1 is like all the surprise deaths that you didn't see coming. It's like, oh, the most hated guy in the show, or one of them, boom, he gets axed, before he gets replaced by Joffrey the next season. Oh, the king, boom, he's dead. Oh, Ned Stark, your main character, boom, he's dead. It was all like, oh, Khal Drogo, this big mighty warrior, oh, boom, he's dead. It was like season 1 was like all about the unexpected deaths, but season 2 to me was like the true reinforcement. It's like, oh, you have a guy who like seems to be determined to like actually make a mark on this world as far as how good he is and like how much he actually cares. Boom, dead. That was just like a constant reinforcement. And there was even more in the books, because there was like even more minor characters that we didn't get a chance to spend time with, who like were immediately off like as soon as the chance came.
Yeah, it's one of those things with this episode in particular. Like, I think this is the precursor, right? We're setting everything up for Renly to basically, enter the next phase of his life.
I
don't know.
Matter of speaking.
Wow. I'm trying to hold.
And you criticized me last week. Goddamn.
I'm trying to hold back the spoiler, but it's happening next week, I believe.
Yeah.
So
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. It doesn't happen right away.
Nope.
Yeah, it seemed to happen really quick, but
yeah, it does. But
yeah. So the main thing is like, Catelyn and Renly are trying to work some sort of alliance. It's not coming apart, the way it is. And, Brienne basically has that great line at the end of that sequence, right? Going back to them walking, where she's like, Brienne will be fine. I'm no lady. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's truly the nature of her character. And it's understandable. Like she embodies this strong knight where her gender doesn't really matter. Yes. And of course, we'll see later in the series that her gender gets her into a little bit of trouble. But the character is that's doesn't get in her way.
No.
It's just it's a reality that she deals with, and she typically handles herself really well.
Yeah, one of the best intros for one of the most longest lasting, biggest fan favorite characters on the show. The only other thing really with the storyline that really gets established here, both kind of with both of Renly's scenes of sex scenes, obviously first with Loras and then later with Margaery, is the fact that Renly has kind of taken the place of Robert as far as we've seen both Baratheon brothers in action now. Stannis in the first 2 episodes, and now Renly. Even though we already knew who Renly was, we're seeing him in a different light now. And the whole contrast there is that both of them have gotten seemingly like the two opposite sides of the Baratheons that seem to be like merged to get perfectly together in their older brother Robert at one point, which is Stannis is the dutiful like man on a mission. Like when he wants something, he is going to get it, and absolutely nothing is going to get in his way. And Renly is more of like the party guy, chill guy. He just wants to indulge really, and that is what Renly proves ultimately, both in his scene with Loras and how into it he is with, and Loras is trying to like get him to focus up and be like, you need to start acting like a king. The people are snickering behind your back, even though he's really just pissed about him losing to Brienne. And then later on with Margaery, when Margaery of course tries to seduce him in, quite frankly, one of the most memed moments. Like I feel like that's a moment right there for everyone who's coming of age right now, and he just clearly like it just shows. She's like she even reinforces it. It's like, look, I don't care how this happened. Like we're in this marriage for one reason and one reason only, and we're like the second richest family in Westeros after the Lannisters, and so you have payments that you need to make if you want us to continue to support your claim for the throne. So
yeah, so it's all one scene. It's actually Renly's there with Loras, and he's like nursing him with his wound from the joust, and Loras is basically
a bruise.
But like
it's not even a wound. There's no cuts.
I think he like punches him there, and he's like, "Oh, this must hurt" or whatever. They're being like playful, and basically Loras isn't having anything of it. He's just like still angry that like Catelyn Stark is there asking for their help, etc. And he's also like, "No, not tonight. It's like you have other duties to perform," and that's the intro to Margaery. And she comes in, and you're thinking, okay, well, Renly, of course, has
to go down.
He has to keep up appearances, and there's an illusion that Margaery doesn't really know, and like Renly really feels that way, and instantly, like that when Margaery breaks down the wall and says, pretty much like, hey, it doesn't matter if you want Loras here, or you want to pretend I'm Loras, or you want to do whatever it takes, we have to get the child. And going to your point, it's like this is a nice introduction to the Tyrells in terms of how open they are and how they basically say, hey, this is the way things are, and this is our position, and this is what we expect to get. Absolutely. And Marjorie's like, hey, it could be the three of us in this relationship. Ultimately, we need an heir to prove that this marriage is viable.
Yeah, it's kind of like a really subtle, like interesting similarity between the two families right there, because it's like they're both rich, they're both in the South, they both have like kind of this plentiful consumption the way that kind of the Northerners really don't. We really only got to know the Northerners in the first season. Now we're really getting to know some of the Southerners, and as we'll see, in a couple seasons, like some of the very, very far Southerners, and kind of the expansion of the world in a sense of like showing what the different cultures do. They're obviously a lot more open-minded just about everything in general, something that the best Tyrell, who gets introduced next season, Lady Olenna Tyrell basically reinforces Tavares and Tywin Lannister, basically like kind of clamping down on their status. But they have a really interesting way of showing it. The Tyrells, I feel like if people had actually given them half a chance, showed that like there was a reason why they still had their foothold, even though they were like quote unquote the weakest family. Like they were known for being like diplomats and everything, and they were known for, to quote Frank Underwood from House of Cards, killing them with kindness. As Margaery shows, obviously when the Tyrells are forced to flip sides, they're also great political opponents. And as far as kind of Renly Baratheon being like kind of one of the last vestiges of the Baratheons before they kind of fell off, it's a smart move in the moment ultimately. But it's kind of the setup ultimately for Renly to be the next in a long line of casualty of failures that come from people who try to get things that they can't get. But now I want to get into my absolute favorite part of the season. And to me, this is Peter Dinklage's Emmy reel right here. This entire sequence.
This episode, yeah.
I swear, just this episode. Well, it's between this episode and Blackwater are the two. There's a couple moments in episode 6, but it's between this episode and Blackwater as just Peter Dinklage's Emmy reel. Because he is on fire from beginning to end. The political play that he pulls here, and like put together with whoever edited this episode, like deserved the fucking Emmy, because it was unbelievable, the editing job that was done here, where Tyrion basically pulls off the ploy of all ploys. He has this idea in order to continue to protect his family, but first he needs to find out out who on the small council is Cersei's spy, and he does it in the most brilliant way possible by taking the same piece of it. He quite literally takes Varys's a piece of advice that he got from Varys as far as using riddles in order to what's it called? In order to solve things, get what he wants. He gives the same piece of information with one crucial detail changed to each of the 3 small council members, Varys, Pycelle, and Littlefinger, basically telling them that he is planning to send Myrcella out of the city for her own safety, while at the same time planning to marry her. But he tells each of the each of the 3 different
was
ones
it
something different.
Pycelle is told that
Pycelle is told
going to
told
Dorne.
the truth, ironically enough, that she's going to Dorne. Littlefinger is told
the Vale.
About the Vale, and then Varys is told about the Iron Islands to wed
okay.
Theon.
Can we just say that Varys definitely did not believe?
Varys didn't believe that for 1 second. But like that,
and I think it's proven.
That's why he could have lied, because like that was still when like Varys was like one of the top 5 smartest people in all of Westeros before he completely blundered in the final season, and like it was pretty obvious. Like it was a different somebody too in the book as well. Like he was not planning on wedding her to Theon in the book.
This is a weird scene because like this is the 3rd time that I've watched this particular episode.
Yeah.
And
it's still great every single time. Like I've seen this.
Yeah.
Like
so I watched it like 3 weeks ago, and basically, hey, the scene is great. It is well crafted. It makes total sense. Then I watched it again today, and at the very end, who's Tyrion drinking with after all his plots come together? He's drinking with Varys, and so Varys like knew the whole time. How is he tricking Varys in the early scene?
I don't know.
What I mean?
Maybe it was just a sense of like once Varys figured out like the Shay twist at the end. Maybe that was when in a strange way Tyrion was like, "This is my guy. This is my guy right here."
In the end, so this is the other thing we got to talk about, right? So Shay is complaining like you keep hiding me in this room. Yes. I can't stay in this room. I need
Shay
to.
is turning out to be more like here's the thing. I never liked Shay in the books. I kind of tolerated her, but Shay is continually proven to be like one of the worst characters here. I'm sorry. Like Shay is not a good character. She's only there to serve one purpose. She's very one note.
Yeah, it's leverage over Tyrion, and
yes,
that's
ultimately what it is.
When is that shoe gonna drop? You know?
It's like the worst time of still like, oh, we need to give him a romantic angle because he needs something to lose in this game because otherwise he's completely invulnerable, which kind of sucks because my whole thing is I loved Tyrion when he was kind of like untouchable. That's the whole thing. Like that's kind of what made him so appealing in the first season. Like I get that doesn't bode well for longevity, but still,
Yeah, but the actor that plays Shay did a really good job.
She is good. I do commend Sybil Kikili. Really good actress, really good job.
Yeah, it's definitely a reason why like this character, just goes on and on and on. Besides the fact that it's leverage, because they could have easily like wrapped up that storyline by the end of this season, but it clearly goes into a couple more seasons. But anyway, so Tyrion is going to get her some sort of job, and it's going to be the kitchen wench, but obviously that's no good for her. So,
right. So instead she gets the job as Sansa's handmaid, which is what you would think would be a dream job, but of course it's Sansa in the earlier seasons who is at the peak of her bratty teen age. So
yeah, well, it's also like it goes back to the early point is like you think Tyrion got that job, but at the end when he's drinking with Varys, it's clear that Varys is the one who pulled the string and got Shay in there. So it's one of those things where like Varys and Tyrion are working together, and it really like kind of undercuts that beautiful sequence of telling the 3 a lie, because Varys already knew in my mind when he was being told. So was this like them pretend? I think too much about it now. You know what I mean? It's like I'm overthinking it, and I understand that's not what it's designed to do, but I think it's a little weakness in that sequence that we love so much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most well crafted sequences I think in the history of Game of Thrones. Like if I ever do like a Game of Thrones moments top 10 list, like I have like an episodes top 10 list plan. I'm still not sure if I want to do characters anymore. I think just keeping it at episodes and then doing all of the seasons ranked once that's done is enough for me. But like, if I was to ever do top 10 Game of Thrones moments, this would absolutely be in it, because it also has probably the funniest payoff of any of them. Like, well, first we have the obvious, which is where Tyrion obviously gets his answer as to who's ratting him out to Cersei, which obviously turns out to be Pycelle when Cersei comes at him with the Dorne accusation. But the thing is too, is that even though he very clearly like knows which intention what his intentions for Myrcella are, because it's almost like he kind of already knew who the spy was and just needed some extra confirmation as far as Cersei goes. But like, he still stated that he needs Littlefinger, obviously, you know, even though he wasn't actually intending to send, even though he wasn't actually intending to send him to Lysa. In this instance, he still plans on using him, as far as kind of using him to leverage. It's like, okay, instead of this Tully sibling, you'll get the other one, the one who you actually liked, who is now readily available with a dead husband, in order to kind of get Jaime back.
I think one of the things that's great about this episode is when Baelish confronts him. It's like, I don't like being made a fool of. Keep me out of your, petty.
Keep me out of your little games. And he's like, and how I suppose quality Aidan Gillen overacted. Aidan Gillen pulls rocks like 3 different Irish accents in this entire show, and he nails every single one of them. I don't know what's a better Aidan Gillen like accent shift track, like this or The Wire, but either way, it's amazing because he rocks off like 3 different accents in this. It's like, and it's like, and Howard Hall, I suppose that's off the table as well. I'm like, bro, what kind of Captain Jack Sparrow impression are you doing here?
No, he's brilliant in this role, and he plays it really well. I agree. And the greatest moment is like, he's like, keep me out of all your ruses and all that stuff.
And he's like, that's
and Tyrion's like,
you were to be the subject of my next deception. Like Tyrion just in this role as Hand of the King is bouncing so well off. And they are literally just doing the opposite of everything that Ned Stark did. He doesn't trust Littlefinger, but he uses him as effectively to his ability. He quickly makes friends with Varys, who he realizes he can actually trust to a certain extent. And he gets rid of Pycelle immediately because he realizes just how useless he is overall. Because like, once he outs Pycelle, it's literally just kind of exposes him as like, oh yeah, what kind of use do you have if you're not going to serve me and you're just kind of like this doddery old man who doesn't really do anything else? Like it was funny.
Well, it's also a great scene, right? Like when Bronn, Tyrion, and the hill guy break in.
Line too before we get into it, where it's like stutter, like filthy old stoat, almost feels sorry for him, and Tyrion's just like, no, you don't. And he's like, no, you don't. I've used that line so many times in my real life now, Pat, it's not even funny.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing that's great about this scene. So Bronn, Tyrion, and also one of the Hill Tribe guys bust in on Pycelle, basically, with one of the women that he's paying. And, basically, Tyrion is, at some point...
Scene. Like, this is just the extra cherry on top.
So at some point, Tyrion says, cut off his manhood and feed it to the goats. And then the Hill Tribe person says, there are no ghosts here.
He says there are no ghosts, half-men. And Tyrion's like, we'll make do.
Yeah, we'll make a do. He has this amazing, nice exaggerated line. It's really a brilliant scene. Well done by all the players.
You see what I mean about this being Dinklage's Emmy reel? Like, he didn't need to submit any. He just needed to put this and then a few of the scenes from Blackwater, and like he was set.
Yeah, but I also think the idea of threatening Pycelle with, the castration is also a nice, seed that's planted, again, for what's going to take place for one of our other favorite characters that we still have to talk about this episode.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and unfortunately, Pycelle loses his beard. I think that's the best thing that he got. And then when Tyrion basically confirms that he's completely useless, and Pycelle does some quality old man yammering when he gets dragged to the dungeons. It's funny, I was watching this with a couple of my friends, and my one friend who never watched the show before, I still don't know how, was cracking up at Pycelle just like doddering. It was just like really funny.
It's fantastic.
Especially since it's revealed in the previous season that his kind of old man routine is all an act. I don't know if that was a thing that like they got from the books or if that was just like a thing that they made up for the show, but either way it works incredibly well. It actually leads to one of my favorite deleted scenes from season 3 that we'll get to. But we get to like our last major kind of story sequence before we get to the end sequence, which is of course Theon. Poor Theon.
Before we get to Theon, I just want to say in that Varys sequence when he's having drinks at the end.
Yes. Oh man.
Yeah, Varys is talking about the riddle, right? And it's like these 3 different lords are in a bar and there's a sellsword there. Who has the power?
It's like, who is it? A king, a priest, and a rich man. Each of them bids the sellsword kill the other. Who lives and who dies?
Yeah, where does the power reside?
Where does the power reside?
Tyrion answers in the sellsword, and basically the riddle is the power resides where the people believe it resides.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that is a nice sort of way that Varys sees this Game of Thrones is who can win the hearts and minds of the most people.
Exactly.
In the
But also
Kingdoms.
playing off this idea that like kind of rich men can't control everyone. They can't control the common folk simply by means of it. They need kind of a means in order to control the common folk. But by arming them, they have to be careful enough before, giving them too much power. It's a balancing act, a kind of yin and yang almost. It's what kind of makes the world go round. And I think he phrases it really well here by not necessarily stating that it's like it reinforces the central idea of Game of Thrones, which is that it is no good or bad. There is kind of equal weight on both sides. They both need each other. To quote Thanos from Infinity War, obviously, perfectly balanced in every way is kind of how things need to be between the higher lords and the peasants.
Dom, you just brought up two
Marvel.
Disney properties.
I finally broke.
No, two.
I broke the non-Marvel
You brought up two
property.
Disney properties to describe Game of Thrones.
Damn.
You're talking about Thanos and the Sword in the Stone.
I was doing so well. I was doing so well with not bringing Disney into this podcast, but alas, we made it 13 episodes. I feel like that's pretty good.
You legitimately sang a song from The Sword in the Stone, but that's okay, Dom. I like that movie. I think it's great.
I don't even remember that movie, to be completely honest. Like
Oh,
I've seen so many of the Disney movies. Like
King Arthur?
I remember it, but like it's one of those ones that it's been a while since I've watched it. So
Yeah, well, when Merlin turns King Arthur into
what is
a
it? Turns
fish.
him like a bird or a fish?
Oh, it's like a fish and a squirrel and whatever. And I think when he's the fish, he's singing the song to and fro, stop and go, blah blah blah. And you sort of were just bringing that up in a little subtle way, but that's okay. Hey. But now that Varys, he's told his riddle, power is where it resides. I'll tell you where the power isn't and will never reside,
With
and
Theon.
that's at the Iron Isles.
I knew you were going. I knew
Oh
you
my
were
God.
going with that. Oh man, poor
Holy-
Theon. Just kind of catch a break. Also, our focus episode, a focus character for today's episode, Theon Greyjoy. It's in the title, obviously. What is dead may never die. Kind of.
Yeah, I think it's the Greyjoys in general, because I have a little qualm with the Greyjoys.
A little.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, the
Their plans make no fucking sense. First of all.
The Iron Price makes no sense. It's like
their whole way of life is just completely like non. What's the word I'm looking for?
Viable.
It's, exactly, not viable.
It's not viable. It's basically what it is hey, we're gonna be as ignorant as possible, and we're gonna keep our blinders on, and we're gonna pay the Iron Price. We're just going to pay that price.
Yep, we're gonna go and do shit recklessly, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. And so basically, the value that Balon at least puts on it, and it seems like most of the people of the Iron Islands, is that as long as you're, sort of ignorant enough to just go through it all and bear it and pay the Iron Price and come out a strong person afterwards, and you survive, that's all that matters. And, let's just say, like, Theon is going to pay the ultimate Iron Price, and I guess it's just like he doesn't have to, but it's set up. He's on the path to paying his Iron Price because Balon. Basically, what's happening here is Balon gave up his son to Ned Stark when he lost his rebellion, and his older sons were killed. And so Balon, as part of the truce, just gave Theon to go be a ward in the north of Ned Stark's. And basically, now that Theon has returned, Balon just rejects him. Doesn't believe it's his son, doesn't want it to be his son, doesn't want to bring him back, just wants to see him as a weak part of the enemy, and he will not really treat him like he is his own. And Theon, he really realizes that he can't really go back to that life where he's just like a sidekick of Robb, and he wants to know his family, he wants to be a part of his family, and he truly believes that if he starts acting like his family, that he could sort of integrate and find loved ones once again. And, basically in this particular episode, he's writing Robb, and he's going to lean back on, who he knows and, who is his, sort of chosen, I guess they chose him, right? So he's part of the Starks, but he decides to burn that letter and therefore choose to do whatever it can to get back in the good graces of his father. And he's ultimately going to pay the Iron Price for that decision.
Yeah, ultimately, Theon's between a rock and a hard place, and ultimately, this is the true beginning of Theon's journey, right? Theon is one of those characters that really doesn't come into his own until season 2. Martin, obviously, I'm sure always intended for him to be a large part of it when he was writing the first book, but like Theon goes from like basically a glorified sidekick character to actually having like probably one of the most difficult journeys, obviously, both physically and mentally, to navigate throughout Westeros from kind of
well I'm laughing because you bring up like he's a sidekick character, so he's a
glorified sidekick in that first season.
So he's a sidekick of a superhero, so to speak, and then he becomes the crappy sidekick of a supervillain.
Who's the one making Disney references now?
Listen, hey, you opened the door, but the fact
man.
is,
come on, Pat. I thought you were supposed to be the one to close it behind me.
Yeah, so Theon basically, goes from good sidekick to bad sidekick. That's his arc in this story.
That's his arc within the first couple seasons before he finally gains liberation and says, "Hey, I'm gonna be my sister's sidekick, and then I'm gonna sacrifice myself for my original sidekick sidekick family."
So sidekick through and through, basically is
through and through.
He's our focus character.
Theon's role in this story. I guess the only difference was that he actually got laid in these first 2 seasons. But no, Theon, in all seriousness, though, Theon is between a rock and a hard place. He ultimately has to choose between the family that raised him and that he knows most of his life versus his so-called born family. Even though it's very clear that his original family really doesn't give a shit about him, and they quite literally just use him as a prop. He's quite literally at a point of no return, kind of forcefully into this position where if he had made the right decision and gone back to Robb and said, "Hey, we're not going to have any help from my father, and he's going to attack your home now," I think that it definitely would have obviously halted the Starks campaign, obviously, and it would have shifted things radically, but ultimately we see how things progress, obviously. And because this is the inclusion now of the other houses, right? We see the Tyrells getting involved, obviously, with Renly's campaign, and now we see the Greyjoys planning to make their move.
Yeah, if we fantasy book, what would you think would happen? Theon goes back. He tells Robb, or maybe he just sends a raven.
From a more classical sense, yeah. Maybe he sends a raven, whatever. He maybe goes home to Winterfell.
But do you think Robb basically then tries to cross back to the north and just encamp in, and then
I think that what happens is Robb sends some of his bannermen, and the bannermen quickly root them out, and I think that Theon still gets captured and like framed, because I think that the Boltons are still plotting to make their move, because I think
if the Boltons the Boltons would probably be the ones that went back up,
right,
and then Theon would probably have traveled back into Robb's camp, so relatively maybe it plays out a very similar way where the Boltons sort of secure the north. But Theon basically just ends up dead at the Red Wedding instead of tortured by Ramsay.
Because the thing is that at the end of the day, right, we know that the Starks are done for, obviously, because of obviously how the Red Wedding goes. But the weird thing about how the Greyjoy storyline goes, as far as like bringing in the other Greyjoys, like the other members of Theon's family, is that it ultimately becomes bigger than Theon. And regardless of kind of what happens to Theon, whether he betrays the Starks, whether he gets captured by Ramsay, whether he dies some other way, whether he makes it through the rest of it, we still have the rest of the Greyjoy family. Obviously, the Greyjoys are really weird because of all of the kind of ancestors within Westeros. They're the only ones that really aren't described, right? Because we know that a majority of the Southerners are descended from the Andals. We know the majority of the Northerners are descended from the First Men. The Targaryens are obviously, their own thing from the Doom of Valyria. But very little is known about the origin of the Iron Islanders and the Greyjoys. The whole thing about them is that they worship a religion that is completely separate from the major religions of Westeros. They worship this entity known as the Drowned God, right? Which is obviously, that they kind of do their own version of christenings, right? Where the whole thing is when someone is marked a warrior, as we see what happens when Theon makes his final decision at the end of this episode, they're kind of dunked into the sea in terms of like drowning, and before they are born again, they're quite literally suffocated underwater.
Yeah, that was a really good sequence. I think it's well done. And if you do have HBO Max, go and watch the featurette of the creators talking about it.
I'm sure it's awesome.
They're so proud of it.
Of course. They're proud of like the sickest and most twisted scenes on those shows. They're probably proud of like a lot of some of the more heinous scenes that we're going to get into later on in the show.
I don't think getting baptized for war is a sick scene, but like for the most part, it's just like it's a ceremony, and Theon, the actor that played him, basically he does a nice subtle job of sort of like looking at his father and sister and trying to belong going through the motions. I think there's probably a little bit of fear behind those eyes of like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. Like this is
the whole rest of the season. This sets
end well.
this sets Theon up for. And honestly, like I said, I think it's one of the most underrated arcs in the entire history of the show, specifically Theon's arc this season. Because the problem is, again, he just goes from like being like a torture victim for one season to like being like kind of like a hounded on, like beaten down like puppy dog slave in the next 2 seasons, to finally like starting to like just ending up going to being like a traumatized victim for the last 3 seasons. But this season is probably his most compelling arc as well. Like those were always the 3 standouts to me from when I read A Clash of Kings, was Tyrion, Theon, and Davos, obviously, just because seeing Davos' kind of insight to the whole Stannis thing was just fascinating to read. But Theon is literally in that mindset of what the fuck am I doing for the entire rest of the season, because literally it's not even just one of those things where it's like he kind of has a sense of it. Literally everyone is telling him, dude, you are fucking up. His sister tells him that. His soldiers tell him that after a certain point. Maester Lewin tells him that when he eventually conquers Winterfell. It literally gets to the point where he has to get knocked out.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is basically, he's applying this knowledge that he learned from the Starks. And as soon as he sees like an opening, like, oh, this is what the Starks would do, and he does conquer Winterfell in the next couple episodes, essentially that was not the move that a Greyjoy should have made, because it brings too much attention.
Well, not just that. It goes kind of against their kind of lifelong battle strategy that's always been a thing with the Greyjoys, which is the whole thing is they don't venture too far inland. Like he said, he's like woods, coast, towns. The whole thing is they want to, usually whenever the Ironborn invade, they go for obviously coastal cities, but also because they go for like the neck, because the neck is the neck, which is kind of the transition point between the north and the rest of the 7 kingdoms, geographically speaking, on Westeros, is the thinnest region. So therefore that's the region that they could take and actually hold on to, because the whole thing is that if they go too further inland, they don't really have any backup, because it would take too long for their ships to reinforce them, because they're at their strongest when they're conquering from the sea. And also because the neck holds the transition point between the north and the south, that it has like one very specific passway, and if the Ironborn hold it, they essentially control who gets into the north. Balon's strategy, even though his motivations are fucking dumb, his strategy is actually smart. The problem is that Theon, in his awful attempt to impress his father, completely overlooks the lack of the inherent stupid lack of logic in conquering Winterfell. Like Balon specifically says here, we should not conquer Winterfell. It's too far inland. We can't hold it. And at the end of the day, there will be other forces that mass upon us, versus if we hold the neck, Winterfell will be forced to come to us, and they can hold the neck out and defend it, obviously, much better.
So one of the things that I will say is Theon conquering Winterfell, it does make sense, but not in the way that Theon thought about it. Theon was thinking in terms of the Stark's turn, which is take and hold. But in terms of the Greyjoy thinking, it would have been ransack the place,
and leave,
like murder everybody. Like Theon wasn't ready to do that, and I think obviously he's sort of getting into what happens later in the season. Like he tries to trick everybody into thinking he did something terrible to Bran and Rickon, but like for the most part, he should have been that guy. He should have conquered. He should have like destroyed the gates. He should have destroyed the farms, destroyed everything, and literally bolted back to the sea. Because now, hey, hook up with your father Balon. Say we ransacked this place. We destroyed it. We got rid of Bran and Rickon. Like he should have gotten rid of them. And then it's like now the North is going to be in shambles. It's sort of their home base is in shambles. And if they were to take that neck, like you're saying, basically then Robb and his armies would not be able to return, and therefore the North would sort of just fall apart.
Absolutely.
So it could have worked, but obviously
not in the way that Theon thought. Had grown to like kind of because that's the other thing too, is it's part of the Stark strategy. He grew up learning the Stark strategy, not the Greyjoy strategy.
But this is a Greyjoy curse, because Balon refused to welcome him back. And if Balon welcomed Theon back, Theon would have had this plan, and Balon could have been like, okay, but let's tweak it. And he could have been a father, and they could have actually father and son and sistered this, and they could have actually done well. But it's one of those things where their iron price, like I gave up my son, And the iron price, that was the iron price, doing something so hard, giving up my son and thinking he was, left for dead. It's like when he comes back, it's like, well, I already paid that price. You're dead to me. And so Balon emotionally just can never accept his son because that's part of this ignorant iron price philosophy that they have going on.
Yes, absolutely. You're 100% on the money as far as that goes. And that's why the Greyjoys are such finicky beasts, and why I think that probably of all the characters and groups of characters that got screwed by the later season, I think the Tyrells in a weird way got it the best because the Tyrells were basically out at the end of season 6. Like, season 6 was essentially the end of the Tyrell, so the only Tyrell left for the last 2 seasons was Olenna, who was quickly offed in like one of the best scenes in season 7. And then, but unfortunately, the poor Martells and the Martells and the Greyjoys are both screwed over horrendously by the last season, because the whole thing is that later on in the books we get to know the other Greyjoys, because Balon has, besides Euron Greyjoy, he has 2 other brothers, one of which is in the show but is never referred to as such. It's the priest that baptizes Theon. That's Theon's youngest uncle, Aeron Greyjoy, also known as Damfair. He has a whole crazy backstory in the books and crazy moment. And then Balon also has a 3rd brother, Victarion, who is actually the one who goes over to try and make an alliance with Daenerys in the books. And that whole thing gets cut. Like, the whole interest of Euron Greyjoy is that Euron is a character who in the books was very much a mysterious character. Like, he was very much held in the backdrop. I think the only time we saw Euron in the books was for the King's Moot, and it was still like kind of mysterious whether he was kind of held in suspicion whether he had killed Balon, and he didn't just like openly announce it. Like, the Euron in the books is a completely different character that we got. But ultimately, at the end of the day, yeah, this whole iron price thing, it's kind of setting up the Greyjoys for failure from the get-go, ultimately. So we got, well, that was our focus character. That was also our kind of gotcha-verse segment as well. We talked a little bit about House Greyjoy, but we have one more storyline to wrap up this episode. And even it's funny because, again, there's so many banger storylines, right? The Renly, what's it called? The Renly Brienne sequence, the Tyrion sequence, the Theon. It's all like really fucking good stuff.
Yeah,
and you're
listen,
like, okay,
Dom,
there couldn't be anything else awesome to top this off.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you
sequence.
real quick.
Oh no,
like,
don't tell me you don't like this sequence.
Like, literally, we're talking about the Greyjoys, and it's like, oh, we talked about Tyrion, and we talked about Renly, we talked about Craster, and I'm like,
Craster.
We're done, right? We talked about everything that this episode has to offer, and you're right. You literally just reminded me.
You're kidding me. You forgot about this scene?
I totally forgot
that.
This happens in this. I know this scene, but I forgot it was this episode because there's
so much good stuff that happens. It's insane. Like, this might be like top 10 for me, like top 10 best Game of Thrones episodes.
It is a really jam-packed episode, and
all the stuff is awesome.
You're obviously talking about Euron and Arya, and it starts off with Arya like she's sharp.
Euron.
Yeah,
you said Euron and Euron. Those are another two names that can get mixed up.
Yeah. So essentially, on the road to the Night's Watch, Arya is can't sleep, and she can't sleep because she saw these terrible things with her father being killed, Sansa like begging for his life, Joffrey so happy, and all this thing, like all the things that she's seen, like her killing the stable boy that was trying to trap her, all this like murder and death and trauma, and she doesn't know how to process any of this, and basically asks for advice, like how do you sleep after all this traumatic stuff? And here we get one of the best stories.
One of the best stories. Like Game of Thrones is known for its monologue. Game of Thrones is known for its like one monologue stories, but like this is like an actor's dream right here, because the actor who portrays Euron, I gotta look him up because this guy is such a good fucking actor. Like he deserves all. Francis McGee, that actor, Francis McGee. I've only seen him in one other thing, but he crushes it here. He like
it's all about revenge, right?
Yeah, basically his entire life's backstory about how this one smug knight came into town, killed his brother, and then when the knight came, and basically his kind of way of reconnoitering himself to his brother's murder and getting past the trauma of it was by whispering the knight who killed his brother's name over and over and over and over.
He thought about him all day.
He
said his name like a prayer, and he actually thought about his brother's murderer so much that over time that he forgot what his brother looked like. And all he can remember is, William was like this beautiful,
Willem
killer. Yeah, Willem. And it was like he like almost idolized him so much in his revenge, and then when he came back in town, he just killed him. And
as he says, buries an axe so deep in his head they had to bury it with him. Like, if that's not a better way to describe how to kill someone, I don't know what is. That's a fantastic line right there.
Yeah, and this is just like the opening of the sequence. It's just like
sequence.
to get you like started.
Of course, that's how you know. I was literally even said this to my friend. I'm like, man, he gives a badass monologue like that, dead in the next scene. And what do you know? I was right, because of course the horns blow. The Kingsguard members are back this time with Lannister guards led by a Sir Amory Lorch, tells them to surrender. And of course, Yoren says, "I don't think I will." Like, Yoren, I don't know what Yoren knows that he's outnumbered here. He knows that these guys can't fight. Like, what is it you think is going through his head in this moment? Like he knows he's outmatched, so he may as well go out swinging, or?
Well, I think it's just his sense of duty, right? You know, because
my whole thing is he has nothing to gain. Like, his whole thing is to protect Arya, right? He has nothing to gain by giving up Gendry, you know? So the only thing that's driving him is his sense of, like, moral righteousness, which, as we know, is a surefire way to get you killed in this universe.
Well, I think it's you know, his whole story was how he got to the Night's Watch, because he buried the axe so deep in him, and then he went immediately to the wall and pled his oath to the Night's Watch. And so I think he's been, you know, it's almost a lifetime that he's been with, you know, this organization, and he believes in the whole, we're brothers. And so even though he's taking these people and they're just sort of like, you know, they could be rapists and murderers and, you know, just abandoned orphans, etc., and he's taking him to the wall, he essentially is treating them as if they're, you know, his brothers in arms. And I think it's one of those things. So when you come at your brothers, it's, what are you going to do? You're going to fight for it. And I think this is also the beauty of this scene, is because his story is like, oh, you know, like this knight came up to my brother and I just sat there and watched it. And then basically he tells the story of revenge. And at this point, it's these guards are coming in and it's like they're attacking his brothers. And I think what he's thinking is, not again. I've grown. I've become a real man. And, you know, and I didn't interfere when this happened when I was a kid. But now I'm a grown man. I'm responsible for these people, and I'm not going to let this happen.
Yep, and,
so
he goes out like a champion. He does. I literally pointed this out. I'm like, holy shit, he got Boromired in this episode, and it's totally true. He gets like stabbed with multiple spears, and the guy comes in, and he like stabs him right behind the neck. I'm like, oh, it's pretty gruesome as far as that goes. Like, they really make sure like they get the close up there.
First blood is the crossbow, and he's like, I've always hated crossbows.
I've always hated crossbows, and he starts like slicing people left and right.
It's the line is too long to reload, and then he just like chops someone's head off. But like, it's a badass action sequence.
Badass way to go out too. R.I.P. Yoren.
Yeah, the psychology is all there, like from the opening monologue even into the fight scene. It's really intelligent, the writing in that scene. And at the very end, it's like you have all the injured sort of boys, and everyone else has you know, it was forced to surrender, and basically this one boy is like, you know, bleeding and left on the ground, and he's just like, help me, and the knight goes, you know, can you walk? And he's like, no, you'll have
Polifer is the knight. One of many people who find their way onto Arya's shit list as she stops from
Well, because as soon as he's like, you'll have to help me,
you'll have to carry me. That's
he's like, sure.
Will I?
Yeah, and then he uses Arya's sword
needle
to basically stab. You know, he basically reaches out a hand, starts pulling him up, and pulls him into the sword.
It's gruesome.
And yeah, exactly.
And of course, Arya uses this moment when they continue to ask for Gendry, that she's like, you got him. You know, she does the opposite of what Yoren did. She plays the smart move, and she also protects her friend by obviously throwing that on poor Lamy Greenhands. First of all, just to have the name Lamy Greenhands, you know that's a guy who's not lasting long with a name like that. I mean, his friend's name was Hot Pie, but like Hot Pie actually lasted throughout the show. But R.I.P. Yoren and Lamy Greenhands are two casualties.
Yeah, Lamy Greenhands are Lamy Red Shirt, you know.
or Lamy Red, or Lamy Red Throat, I guess is the more accurate term.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think this is
fantastic episode. This is if not for the penultimate episode of the ninth of the last season, I'd say this is the best episode so far yet.
Yeah, and the fact that it lands on that bull helmet that just happens to be
yeah.
laying next to whatever his name is, Lemmy.
Yeah,
You know, yeah, whatever his name is. But like the fact that Arya is quick-witted enough to just throw that in there, and the fact is that they just believe her for some reason.
Yeah. Well, they're Lannisters. They're not known for their intelligence. At least they're foot soldiers. You know, they don't know what this. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's also like, you know, medieval times. They're not exactly known for their whole like finding the right person. They don't have like computer scanning and like a DNA evidence sheet. They kind of just have to go based off of somebody's word.
Yeah, so you know, it's one of those things where it ends the episode quite beautifully, and
Yes.
yeah, it's
Great
like,
episode. This has been like my favorite episode to recap so far.
Yeah, if you're not hyped for the rest of the season 2,
Yeah.
after watching this episode, I don't know what show you're watching, because
Yeah.
this is really the thick of it. This is, you know, how deep and how good the show can actually get.
Absolutely, yeah. So as you guys could tell, we pre-recorded this, yes, because unfortunately at the time that this goes up, Pat will be out of town. But that wasn't going to stop us from getting you guys way more Talkin Thrones content. As you guys know, we will still be going up every single Sunday. We've got a few more pre-recorded episodes, but we will be going live sooner rather than later. We're 3 episodes in, and things are only heating up for season 2. I cannot wait for the rest of it. I am absolutely pumped. This has been my absolute favorite episode to recap so far. You guys can continue to keep track of us by subscribing to the channel right down below, clicking the subscribe button, clicking the bell next to it, giving this video a thumbs up, giving us a comment. I just hit my microphone because that's how excited I am ultimately by this episode. Pat, where can the good people find you on the social webs?
Hey, listen, keep coming back here to Talkin' TV and listening to the Talkin Thrones, show. You know, basically, we'd love to have you. We'd love recapping the show. Hope you join, binge to catch up, you know, and subscribe, you know, whatever the case may be. Also, you can find me at at Patrick W. Huber at Instagram. I'll again post one day. You know, I'm working.
I hope you just make that the running joke for like the rest of the show ultimately.
Well,
and of course,
yeah, ultimately, I it's one of those things. I love Instagram and I love throwing stuff up there, but
every once in a while.
It's I like using the desktop, and then it's like I gotta transfer the photos.
Instagram is not exactly desktop friendly.
Yeah. So I gotta rework my strategy. Maybe Instagram is not the one for me, but
maybe not.
You know,
but
hey, I do like the app. Anyway.
Yes, it is a good app, and you can of course follow me on said app at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, as well as following me on the primary account for this podcast, which is at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. I post every single day. We've still got so much content for you guys. I posted M. Night Shyamalan Ranked this past week. Chris and I did something on a variety show because at the time of this recording, we recorded before the variety show actually went up. Our Ted Lasso and Old podcasts are up. Tomorrow, we put up our Green Knight podcast. We're getting close to the end of the summer. It's kind of crazy here. Like, where has 2021 gone? All of that and more on this channel, which you guys can get by, of course, once again, clicking the subscribe button below. As always, remember, people, more Talkin Thrones each and every single Sunday. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies.
Yeah, drink some more water, by the way. You know, stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, America.
It is summer, at least where we are.